What would you do if the man you loved, the man you legally married the father of your unborn child, tried to erase you not with a whisper, but with a spectacle? Imagine the most opulent wedding of the year, a gathering of the world's elite hosted at the legendary Biltmore estate. The groom, a self-made millionaire, the bride a society heiress. But as the vows are about to be spoken, the grand doors swing open. And there stands a woman, her presence silencing the entire hall. She isn't a guest. She isn't a jilted ex-girlfriend. She's his wife, and she's holding the one thing that can turn the entire glittering affair to ash, the real marriage certificate. Amelia wasn't born into Julian Thorne's world of shimmering glass towers and silent electric cars. Her world had been one of warm, crowded coffee shops, the smell of old books, and the shared dream of building something from nothing. They had met 7 years ago. He was a junior analyst with eyes that burned with an ambition that both thrilled and frightened her. She was a freelance graphic designer who saw the brilliant, insecure man behind the cheap, oversized suit. They fell in love over microwaved dinners in her tiny Brooklyn apartment, their laughter echoing louder than the sirens outside. He'd trace the lines of her palm and swear that one day those hands would never have to work again. Their wedding wasn't in a grand ballroom. It was a simple, heartfelt ceremony at the New York City Hall, with 2 of their closest friends as witnesses. The certificate, a simple document from the state of New York, felt more valuable than gold. It was their foundation, the legal and emotional bedrock of their life together. Julian framed a copy and hung it in their bedroom. Us against the world, he'd whisper, kissing her forehead. And for a while, they were winning. Julian's ambition caught fire. His small tech startup, Thorne Industries, exploded. The Brooklyn apartment gave way to a sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park. The cheap suit was replaced by custom-tailored Tom Ford. Amelia at first was his biggest cheerleader. She designed his company's first logo, celebrated every milestone, and grounded him when his ego threatened to soar into the stratosphere. But the higher he climbed, the more the air around him thinned. The man who once shared his deepest fears with her now spoke in quarterly reports and stock projections. Their intimate dinners were replaced by sterile charity galas, where she felt like another one of his prized possessions. Her simple elegance scrutinized by women dripping in diamonds. He began to travel more always for critical business. She'd call his hotel only to be told he'd left no forwarding number. He'd return smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers and an exhaustion that felt different from work. The signs were there, small fissures in their foundation. A second phone he tried to hide. Vague answers to specific questions. A chilling distance in his eyes, even when he was holding her. Amelia tried to breach the divide. "Julian, we need to talk. I feel like I'm losing you." "Don't be dramatic, Amelia," he'd say, scrolling through his phone. "I'm building an empire for us, for our future. Isn't that what you wanted?" She had wanted a life with him, not an empire without him. The discovery that she was pregnant was for a fleeting moment, a ray of hope. This would save them. A child, their child, would be the anchor they needed. When she told him, his reaction was muted. He smiled, a practiced corporate smile that didn't reach his eyes. He kissed her a peck on the cheek. "That's wonderful news, darling. We'll have to hire a nanny, of course. Get the best." He didn't ask about her. He didn't place a hand on her still flat stomach. He just saw a new asset to be managed. The final soul-shattering blow came not from a confrontation, but from the glossy pages of a magazine. Her friend Chloe had come over, her face pale. She handed Amelia a copy of Tatler, the High Society Bible, and there it was, a lavish 10-page spread. A thorn in Rocher's side, the merger of the century solidified by love. The article detailed the upcoming wedding between Julian Thorne, CEO of Thorne Industries, and Isabella Rocher, the daughter of industrial titan Jean-Pierre Rocher. The wedding was to be the social event of the decade, held at the historic Biltmore Estate in North Carolina. The accompanying photos showed Julian beaming his arm wrapped possessively around a stunning icy blonde. They looked ecstatic. They looked inevitable. Amelia felt the air leave her lungs. The magazine slipped from her numb fingers. It wasn't just an affair. He wasn't just leaving her. He was attempting to publicly and completely erase their existence, their love, their vows, their life. All of it vaporized for a better business deal. He was going to commit bigamy in front of the entire world. The framed marriage certificate in their bedroom seemed to mock her. Us against the world. The world, it turned out, was Julian. For a full day, Amelia did nothing. She sat in the silent penthouse, the city lights twinkling below like a galaxy of indifferent stars. She didn't cry. The shock was too deep, a frozen shard of ice in her chest, where her heart used to be. The baby inside her gave a gentle flutter, a tiny, insistent reminder that she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. On the second day, the ice began to crack, and white-hot fury took its place. He thought she was weak. He thought she was a relic of his past that he could simply discard. He had miscalculated. He had forgotten the woman who had believed in him when he had nothing, the woman who had helped build the very ladder he was now kicking away. She picked up the phone. She wasn't calling a friend to cry. She was calling the sharpest, most ruthless family law attorney in New York City. "My name is Amelia Thorne," she said, her voice steady and cold as steel. "My husband is Julian Thorne, and I need to stop a wedding." Marcus Vance was a man who operated in the silent, brutalist canyons of corporate and family law, where fortunes were won and lost on the fine print of a prenup. When Amelia Thorne walked into his office, he saw what most people saw: a beautifully fragile woman, her designer coat failing to hide the grief in her eyes. But when she spoke, he heard something else entirely. He heard precision. He heard fire. "He's not just cheating on me, Mr. Vance," Amelia began. Her hands clasped tightly on the polished mahogany table. "He is attempting to commit felony bigamy in a very public forum, presumably to secure a merger with Rocher Consolidated. He believes I will simply disappear." She laid it all out: the City Hall wedding, the years of shared life, the sudden emotional Arctic freeze, the pregnancy, and the Tatler article, which she placed on his desk. She then produced a certified copy of her marriage certificate. Marcus examined the document. It was perfect, ironclad, a public record. "He's either monumentally arrogant or monumentally stupid," Marcus mused, leaning back in his chair. "He's both," Amelia stated flatly. "His arrogance makes him believe he can get away with anything. His stupidity lies in underestimating me." "So what is the goal, Mrs. Thorne?" Marcus asked, his gaze sharp. "Do you want to file for divorce now? We can file an injunction to stop the wedding, serve him with papers quietly." Amelia shook her head, a slow, deliberate motion. "No. A quiet injunction is what he expects. He'd pay me off. His lawyers would bury me in paperwork and non-disclosure agreements. He'd paint me as a disgruntled, hysterical ex trying to extort him. The world would see him as the victim. The merger would still go through. No. She leaned forward, and for the first time Marcus saw the warrior beneath the porcelain skin. I don't want to stop it quietly. I want to stop it publicly. I want to be the just cause when the officiant asks. I want every single one of his new powerful friends to see the fraud he is. I want Jean-Pierre Rocher to watch his daughter's fantasy crumble into illegal dust. I want to do it at the altar. Marcus was silent for a long moment. This was not the usual playbook. It was audacious, risky, and could blow back on her in unpredictable ways. It was also, he had to admit, brilliant. It was a strategy of maximum impact. A public confrontation is a high-wire act, he warned. They will have security. They will try to remove you, discredit you instantly. Which is why you'll be there, Amelia countered. Not next to me, but as a guest. You'll have copies of all the legal documents. When they try to throw me out, you step in. Not as my lawyer initially, but as an officer of the court, preventing a felony from being committed in his presence. You will be my legal shield. Over the next 2 weeks, they planned the operation with the precision of a military campaign. Marcus filed the initial divorce proceedings, but put a hold on having them served. The filing created a legal timestamp, proving her actions were premeditated and not a crime of passion. They gathered evidence photos of Amelia and Julian from over the years, affidavits from the friends who witnessed their wedding financial statements, showing their intertwined assets. Amelia, meanwhile, underwent her own transformation. She stopped grieving the man he was and started strategizing against the man he had become. She ate meticulously for the baby's health. She practiced calming breathing exercises, and she researched every member of the Rocher family and the Thorne Industries board. She was no longer a victim. She was a tactician. Her choice of attire was critical. She wouldn't go in rags or in horse-mourning black. That would be playing the victim. She chose a dress of deep sapphire blue, a color of royalty and power. It was elegant, impeccably tailored, and designed to accommodate her barely there 4-month bump. It was a statement of quiet, undeniable presence. The day before the wedding, Amelia flew to Charlotte, North Carolina, checking into a modest hotel far from the opulent resorts where the wedding guests were staying. Marcus was in a separate hotel already on site. They communicated via burner phones. That night alone in her room, a wave of doubt washed over her. The memory of the young, hopeful Julian, the one who kissed her in the rain, came flooding back. Was this vengeful, dramatic act truly who she was? Her hand went to her stomach. The baby kicked a strong, reassuring thump. It was the answer she needed. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about protecting her child from a father who would deny his very existence for profit. It was about claiming her own story, not letting him write it for her. She took out the original marriage certificate from its protective folder. The paper felt heavy, real. It was the one truth in a sea of glittering lies. She slid it into her clutch, a slender, elegant weapon. The next morning, she got ready. Her makeup was understated, but flawless. Her hair was swept into a graceful chignon. She looked in the mirror and saw not the heart-broken wife from 2 weeks ago, but a woman she didn't recognize, and one she deeply admired. She was calm. She was ready. As the chauffeured car she'd hired drove her towards the sprawling fairy tale facade of the Biltmore estate, she knew this day would be the end of a chapter, but it would also be the explosive, unforgettable beginning of a new one. The Biltmore estate was even more breathtakingly ostentatious in person. It rose from the manicured North Carolina landscape like a French Renaissance chateau, a monument to old money, and today, to new lies. Hundreds of the world's wealthiest and most influential people milled about the grand lawn champagne flutes in hand, their polite laughter drowned out by the soaring notes of a string quartet. Amelia's car passed through the main security gate with an authentic-looking invitation Marcus had procured. She'd be just another face in the crowd until the moment was right. She walked through the throng of guests, a ghost from a life Julian had tried to bury. A few people gave her appreciative glances, noting the quiet elegance of her sapphire dress, assuming she was just another guest on the bride's side. The anonymity was a cloak. She found a position in the back of the grand hall, where the ceremony was to take place. The room was a symphony of white roses and lilies, their cloying scent thick in the air. A crystal chandelier the size of a small car hung overhead, casting a brilliant, unforgiving light on everything. Then the music changed. The guests hushed. At the far end of the impossibly long aisle stood Julian. He was immaculate in his tuxedo, his face beaming with triumph. He looked every bit the master of the universe. He caught the eye of Jean-Pierre Rocher in the front row and gave a confident nod. This was the pinnacle of his life's work. Then came the bride. Isabella Rocher was a vision in white, a cascade of designer lace and diamonds. She was beautiful, poised, and walking towards a man who was already married. A pang of something close to pity struck Amelia, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Isabella was no innocent. The gleam in her eye was one of victory. She had won the ultimate prize. Amelia's heart began to pound a frantic drum against her ribs. She took a slow, deep breath, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. "Stay calm. Your moment is coming." The ceremony was a blur of sanctimonious pronouncements about love, trust, and eternal union. Amelia felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat, but swallowed it down. Finally, the officiant, a serene-looking man, who was likely paid a fortune for his role in this charade, reached the pivotal moment. He smiled benevolently at the crowd. "Before these two are joined in matrimony, if there is anyone present who has any just cause why they may not be lawfully joined together, let them speak now or forever. Hold their peace." A beat of expectant silence. This was it. From the back of the hall, a single clear voice cut through the stillness. "I do." Every head swiveled. The collective gasp was a physical force. Amelia stepped out from the shadows of the rear archway. Her heels clicked with deliberate, measured slowness on the marble floor as she began to walk down the aisle, a solitary figure in deep blue moving against a tide of white. Julian's face went through a rapid, sickening series of transformations. First confusion, then disbelief. His eyes widened, his skin paling to a waxy grey beneath his expensive tan. Isabella looked at him, her perfect smile faltering. "Julian." "Who is that?" Beatrice Thorne. Julian's formidable mother, in the front row, shot Amelia a look of pure venom. "Security. Remove this woman at once." Two large men in black suits started moving towards her. But Amelia didn't stop. Her eyes were locked on Julian's. "You don't recognize me, Julian?" She called out, her voice not loud, but carrying in the acoustically perfect hall. It was the voice he heard every day for 7 years. "Perhaps you've forgotten. It's easy to forget things when you're so busy." She was halfway down the aisle now. The guests were on their feet, murmuring phones, starting to discreetly emerge. This was better than a soap opera. "My name," she announced, her voice gaining strength, "is Amelia Thorne, and my just cause for stopping this wedding." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "Is the fact that Julian Thorne is already my husband." A wave of shock rippled through the room. Isabella let out a small, strangled cry and took a step back from Julian, as if he were suddenly radioactive. "She's lying." Julian finally found his voice, a strained, desperate bark. "She's a delusional ex-girlfriend I had years ago. She's obsessed. Security, get her out of here." The security guards reached for Amelia's arms. "I wouldn't touch her if I were you," a calm, authoritative voice said. Marcus Vance rose from his seat in the third row, straightening his tie. "Assaulting a pregnant woman tends to look very bad on the evening news." The word pregnant dropped like a bomb into the already volatile atmosphere. Isabella Rocher visibly swayed her hand, flying to her mouth. Jean-Pierre Rocher's face was a mask of thunder. "And she is not delusional," Marcus continued, walking, to stand a respectful distance from Amelia. "She is in fact the legal Mrs. Julian Thorne." "Prove it," Julian snarled, his composure shattering completely. "This is a pathetic shakedown." Amelia had reached the front. She was now standing just a few feet from them, the unholy trinity at the altar. She looked at Julian, her expression not one of hatred, but of profound, sorrowful disappointment. "You really should have remembered where you put this, Julian," she said softly. From her elegant clutch, she pulled out a folded document. With a flick of her wrist, she opened it. It was the original State of New York marriage certificate, the embossed seal gleaming under the chandelier light. "We were married on October 14th, 7 years ago, at New York City Hall. Our witnesses were Sarah and Ben Carter. I am 4 months pregnant with his child." Amelia said, her voice now resonating with absolute, unshakable truth. "This ceremony is a fraud. The man you are about to marry, Isabella, is a bigamist and a liar." She held up the certificate for all to see. In the dead silence of the hall, the only sound was the frantic clicking of a guest's phone camera, a sound that signaled the beginning of the end for Julian Thorne. The moment the certificate was revealed, the carefully constructed fantasy of the day didn't just crack. It detonated. The scene at the altar devolved into pure, unscripted chaos. Isabella Rocher stared at the document, then at Julian's ashen face, her own a canvas of dawning horror. "Julian," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Tell me this is a joke. Tell me she's a lunatic." But Julian was cornered, a trapped animal. His eyes darted from Amelia's unwavering gaze to Isabella's pleading face to her father's murderous expression. It's complicated," he stammered the worst possible answer. "Complicated!" Jean-Pierre Rocher's voice boomed from the front row as he strode forward, his face purple with rage. "My daughter's wedding is being crashed by your secret wife, who is carrying your secret child, and you call it complicated. You have 5 seconds to explain this before I personally tear your fraudulent empire apart." The guests were no longer even pretending to be polite. Phones were out everywhere, recording the magnificent social implosion. The string quartet had long since trailed off into a discordant squeak. Whispers turned into audible gasps and frantic speculation. "He's married to her. She looks so normal. Did you hear? She's pregnant. This is a bigger scandal than the Van Adler divorce." Julian, finally realizing his usual tactics of bluster and denial were useless, tried a new one deflection. He rounded on Amelia, his face contorted with a vicious snarl. "You did this to ruin me. You were never happy with my success. You're a vindictive gold digger." Amelia didn't flinch. I was with you when your only gold was the filling in your tooth, Julian. I supported you. This isn't about your success. It's about your character, or the lack thereof." "Get out!" shrieked Beatrice Thorne. Julian's mother, her face a mask of fury. She lunged towards Amelia, her lacquered nails poised like claws. "You will not destroy my son." Before she could reach her, Marcus Vance stepped smoothly between them. "Ma'am, I suggest you calm yourself. What your son has done here constitutes attempted bigamy, a Class E felony in this state. My client is the victim here. Every person with a camera phone is a witness. I strongly advise the Thorne family to stop talking." His words, calm and laced with legal menace, had a chilling effect. Beatrice froze. Jean-Pierre Rocher, a man who understood the language of legal and financial consequence better than anyone, took a deep, shuddering breath. He looked at Julia with utter contempt. "The deal is off," he said, his voice low and deadly. "The merger is dead. You will be hearing from my lawyers. You have publicly humiliated my daughter and attempted to defraud my family. I will see to it that by this time next year, the name Thorne Industries is nothing but a footnote in bankruptcy filings." He turned his back on Julian and wrapped a protective arm around his now sobbing daughter. "Let's go, Isabella." The Rocher family, a formidable unit, turned and began to walk away, a clear and public declaration of war. The dam broke. The guests, sensing the spectacle was over and not wanting to be caught in the fallout, began to flee as if the building were on fire. The hall, once filled with the promise of a glorious union, was now a scene of mass exodus. White roses were trampled underfoot. A forgotten champagne flute lay shattered on the floor. Julian stood alone amidst the wreckage, his perfect tuxedo now looking like a costume on a broken mannequin. He looked at Amelia, his eyes filled not with remorse, but with a horrifying, venomous hatred. This was all her fault. In his mind, she was the author of his destruction, not his own actions. "You will regret this, Amelia," he hissed, his voice barely a whisper. "I will leave you with nothing. You and that thing inside you." The threat, so raw and cruel, finally pierced Amelia's armor of calm. For a second, fear flickered in her eyes. But then she looked past him at the empty aisle, at the wilting flowers, at the ruins of his ambition. He had already lost. He just didn't know it yet. "You have nothing left to take, Julian," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She turned Marcus at her side and began to walk away, leaving him standing alone at the altar of his own making. As she passed the last pew, she could hear the first siren in the distance. The media had arrived. The story was just beginning. The Biltmore estate was no longer a fairy tale castle. It was a media siege camp. News vans with satellite dishes crowded the majestic entrance. Reporters shouted questions, their camera flashes like machine gun fire. Marcus, a master of navigating such chaos, had arranged for a private security team to escort them out through a service exit and into a waiting black SUV. As they sped away, Amelia finally let out the breath she felt like she'd been holding for 2 weeks. Her body slumped against the leather seat, the adrenaline beginning to ebb, leaving a profound, hollow exhaustion in its wake. "It's done," she whispered. "The public part is," Marcus corrected gently, handing her a bottle of water. "The private war is about to begin. He's not just going to roll over." He was right. By the time they landed back in New York, Julian had already launched his counteroffensive. A statement was released by a high-priced crisis PR firm. It painted Amelia as an emotionally disturbed and estranged wife from whom Julian had been separated for years. It claimed the divorce was imminent, and that Amelia's actions were a desperate and calculated attempt to extort a larger settlement. It was a classic smear campaign designed to muddy the waters and salvage what little was left of his reputation. Amelia felt a surge of nausea that had nothing to do with her pregnancy. He was trying to gaslight the entire world. They gathered in Marcus's office, which they now referred to as the War Room. It was stark white, overlooking the city, a sterile command center for the messy battle ahead. "His play is obvious," Marcus said, pacing in front of a whiteboard. "He'll file a motion to have you psychologically evaluated. He'll claim you're unfit. He'll try to use the pregnancy against you, saying your hormones are making you unstable. He wants to discredit you as a witness to his own life. But we have the marriage certificate, the photos, the witnesses," Amelia argued, her voice rising. "And he has millions of dollars to hire lawyers who can create doubt out of thin air," Marcus countered. "We need more leverage. Something he can't spin. Something that hits him not in his reputation that's already shot, but in his wallet and his ego." For the next few days, Amelia felt like she was drowning in legal documents and strategic discussions. Julian served her with divorce papers, so aggressive they bordered on harassment, demanding full custody of the unborn child he had publicly denied, and claiming she was an unfit mother. It was a cruel, transparent tactic to scare her into submission. It did the opposite. It erased any lingering sentimentality she had for the man she once loved. This was no longer Julian. This was an enemy. She started digging, not just with Marcus's legal team, but on her own. She spent late nights combing through old emails, bank statements, and documents from the early days of Thorn Industries, a life he thought she had forgotten. She was looking for a vulnerability, a crack in his financial armor. And then she found it. It was in a dusty box in her closet, filled with memorabilia from their first apartment. Tucked inside an old photo album was a document she had barely understood at the time. When Thorn Industries was just a concept, a dream sketched on a napkin, Julian needed a small amount of seed money to incorporate the company. He didn't have it. His parents had refused, calling his venture a pipe dream. Amelia had just received a modest inheritance from her grandmother. It wasn't much, just $50,000, but to them it was a fortune. She had given it all to him without a second thought. In return, he had jubilantly presented her with an official-looking stock certificate. "You're not just my wife, Ames," he had said, kissing her. "You're a founding partner. This makes you a 5% owner of Thorn Industries. One day this piece of paper will be worth millions." She had laughed and put it away, its value purely sentimental. Over the years, as the company grew and went through various rounds of financing, Julian had presented her with stacks of new documents to sign. "Just legal formalities for the new investors, darling," he'd say dismissively. Trusting him, she had signed. She assumed her initial 5% had been diluted into oblivion, worth less than the paper it was printed on. Julian certainly acted as though it had. She brought the certificate to Marcus. "Is this anything?" Marcus took the document, his eyes scanning the formal text the company sealed the date. He was silent for a full minute. Then he looked up, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Amelia," he said, his voice filled with awe. "This is everything," he explained. Julian had indeed tried to dilute her shares. The papers he'd had her sign were attempts to convert her powerful founder's shares into common stock, which would have rendered them nearly worthless. However, the original incorporation agreement had a clause Amelia herself had insisted on after reading a Business for Dummies book, that any change to the status of founders' shares required a separate notarized affidavit of consent, explicitly explaining the dilution. Julian had never gotten that affidavit. In his arrogance, he thought the sheaf of papers he'd had her sign was enough. He had buried the truth under a mountain of jargon, assuming she would never check. "According to this," Marcus said, tapping the certificate, "you are not a 5% owner of the current Thorn Industries. Due to stock splits and anti-dilution clauses, you didn't even know you had your original stake, means you own 22% of the entire company. You are the single largest individual shareholder. Larger than Julian." Amelia stared at him, her mind reeling. "What does that mean?" "It means," Marcus said, the smile widening, "that you don't have to fight him for a settlement. It means you can call a board meeting. It means you have the power to fire him from his own company." The game had just changed. This was no longer a divorce. It was a corporate takeover. The discovery of the stock certificate in the dusty box was like finding a master key in the middle of a maze. Amelia stared at the ornate, slightly yellowed paper, a relic from a more hopeful time. She remembered the day Julian gave it to her, his face flush with excitement, calling her his founding partner. To her, it had been a romantic gesture, a symbol of their shared dream. To him, it had clearly become an inconvenient detail, a loose end he thought he had long since tied up and buried. In the sterile confines of the war room, Marcus Vance initially viewed the document with professional skepticism. Amelia, in most cases like this, these initial shares are diluted to worthlessness over years of fundraising and restructuring. He probably assumes it's just sentimental paper. He presented me with other documents to sign over the years. Amelia admitted, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. "For new investors," he said, "just formalities." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Let me see the company's articles of incorporation, their public record." For 10 minutes, the only sounds in the room were the clicking of his keyboard and the frantic beating of Amelia's heart. He pulled up documents on the large screen, his eyes darting between the original certificate and the digital files. A strange stillness came over him. "That absolute arrogant fool!" he whispered more to himself than to her. He slowly leaned back in his chair, a look of stunned admiration on his face. "Amelia, he made a mistake. A colossal one." He explained, his voice gaining excitement with every word. "The original incorporation agreement, the bedrock of the entire company, contained a clause, the very one she had insisted on, inspired by a late-night reading binge of business books. It stipulated that any alteration to the ownership class or rights of founders' shares required a separate, dedicated, notarized affidavit of consent, wherein the potential dilution was explicitly detailed in plain language. Julian, in his haste and towering self-assurance, had buried the conversion attempts in complex legal jargon within stacks of other investment paperwork. He had never gotten that specific separate affidavit. He assumed she'd never notice. "He didn't just fail to dilute you," Marcus said, standing up and beginning to pace. "The anti-dilution provisions attached to founders' shares, which you never waived, have been triggering with every funding round. Every time he sold a piece of the company, the charter protected your piece. According to these filings, and accounting for 2 stock splits." He stopped and turned to her, his eyes wide. "Amelia, you don't own 5%. You own 22%. You are the single largest individual shareholder of Thorn Industries. You own more of it than he does." The air left Amelia's lungs. It wasn't just a weapon. It was an mental arsenal. She wasn't fighting for scraps from his table anymore. She owned the table. A slow, cold fire began to burn in her veins. The grief she had carried for weeks finally burned away, leaving behind something new purpose. The strategy shifted instantly. The defensive crouch became an aggressive forward lean. The first move was executed with the quiet lethality of a sniper's bullet. Through a prestigious, unaffiliated corporate law firm in Delaware, they formally filed the paperwork to have Amelia's share certificate authenticated and her ownership status officially recorded with Thorn Industries Board and the SEC. There was no press release, no announcement, just a procedural filing that would land like a declaration of war on the desk of Julian's general counsel. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, Marcus's phone began to ring incessantly. Panicked, blustering calls from Julian's legal team were met with calm, unassailable facts. "We are simply correcting a long-standing clerical error in the company's share registry." Marcus would state blandly, refusing to be drawn into an argument. The power dynamic had been irrevocably altered. Julian's motions to have her psychologically evaluated were quietly withdrawn. It was one thing to call a heartbroken wife unstable. It was quite another to level that accusation at your company's largest shareholder. With Julian's camp reeling, Amelia prepared for the second, more public strike. Marcus arranged an exclusive sit-down interview, not with a tabloid journalist who would focus on the salacious details, but with Eleanor Vance, no relation, a senior columnist for the Wall Street Journal, renowned for her sharp, unflinching analysis of corporate America. They prepped for days. Amelia wouldn't be a woman scorned. She would be a guardian of shareholder value. Dressed in a severe but elegant grey suit, she met the journalist in a neutral hotel conference room. She was calm, articulate, and masterful. "Ms. Thorne," the journalist began, "the world knows about the events at the Biltmore. Your husband's camp has painted it as a domestic dispute spilling into public view." "That is the narrative Mr. Thorne would prefer," Amelia responded coolly. "However, I am not here today as a wife. I am here as a founder and the primary shareholder of Thorn Industries, and as such I have a fiduciary duty to address the catastrophic lapse in judgment demonstrated by our CEO. The attempted fraudulent merger with Roche Consolidated was not a domestic issue. It was a corporate action that has exposed this company to billions in legal liability and has erased nearly 40% of our market value in 2 weeks. That is a boardroom issue." She spoke of her deep concern for the company's thousands of employees whose jobs and pensions were put at risk by reckless, ego-driven leadership. She never called Julian a liar. She referred to his verifiably false statements to a potential business partner. She never called him a cheat. She spoke of a breach of the morals clause in his executive employment contract. The final question was pointed. "So what are you going to do?" Amelia looked directly into the camera, her expression one of grim resolve. "The brand's reputation has been severely compromised. Shareholder confidence has been shattered. To protect the future of this company, immediate and decisive action is required. I have therefore used my position as the leading shareholder to formally petition the board for an emergency meeting. The sole item on the agenda will be a vote of no confidence in the current CEO and a motion for his immediate removal." The article landed like a thunderclap. The stock, which had been bleeding out, didn't just stabilize, it jumped 8%. The market understood. This wasn't chaos. It was a coup. It was a course correction. The emergency board meeting was held 3 days later on the 50th floor. The air in the boardroom was thick with tension and the smell of expensive coffee. The 10 board members sat stiffly around the massive obsidian table. Julian at its head looked gaunt and furious. He watched Amelia enter, flanked by Marcus and a team of corporate lawyers, his eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost tangible. She met his gaze with the cool indifference one might show a failing piece of equipment. Ignoring the seat Marcus indicated along the side, Amelia walked to the opposite head of the table, creating a polar opposition to Julian. She remained standing. Julian's ally on the board, a man named Henderson, tried to seize control. This meeting is a farce, a transparently hostile maneuver born of a marital dispute. It is an abuse of corporate process. Before Marcus could respond, Amelia held up a hand. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice cutting through the tension, "my marriage is over. We are not here to discuss it. We are here to discuss the $300 million in shareholder value that Mr. Thorne has personally incinerated in the last month. We are here to discuss the impending multi-billion-dollar lawsuit from Roche Consolidated. We are here to discuss our company's brand being used as a punchline on late-night television. My personal life is the context, but his professional incompetence is the agenda. Do you understand the distinction?" Henderson fell silent. Amelia's gaze swept across the table, meeting the eyes of each director. "I am not here to ask, but to inform. Under his leadership, this company is facing an existential threat brought on not by market forces, but by one man's personal failings. As the person with the most to lose and the most to protect, I am fulfilling my duty." She straightened her shoulders. "I hereby table a motion for a vote of no confidence in CEO Julian Thorne, and for his immediate termination for cause citing gross negligence and breach of his fiduciary and contractual duties." Julian shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "You will not do this. This is my company. I built it from nothing." "You built it with my money," Amelia retorted, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet. "You built it on a foundation you thought was made of my love and loyalty, but it was also made of my stock, and you have run it into the ground with your pride. The board will now vote." The lead director, a stern-faced man named Caldwell, knew there was no other choice. One by one, he called their names. The votes came in, some reluctant, others grimly resolute. The sycophants abstained. The serious directors, the ones who saw their own fortunes dwindling, sided with the woman who had a plan. "The motion carries," Caldwell announced into the stunned silence. 7-3. Julian Thorne is removed as CEO of Thorne Industries, effective immediately. Julian sank into his chair, a choked, guttural sound escaping his lips. The king was dead, and the queen, standing serene and resolute at the head of the table, was just beginning her reign. The silence that fell over the boardroom in the wake of the vote was more profound than any shouting match. It was the sound of a king being deposed in his own court. Julian Thorne, who had entered the room, a titan, seemed to shrink before their very eyes. The bespoke suit that had once projected power now hung on him, like a costume for a part he could no longer play. He stared at Amelia, his eyes a swirling vortex of disbelief, hatred, and for the first time a sliver of genuine fear. The lead independent director cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud. "Julian, as per the board's resolution, your access to company systems will be terminated immediately. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings." The walk from the boardroom to his office was the longest of Julian's life. He passed secretaries who suddenly found their keyboards fascinating, executives who looked away, and junior analysts who stared with a mixture of awe and pity. These were the people who had feared him, revered him, and envied him. Now he was a ghost, haunting the halls of his own fallen empire. Amelia did not watch him go. She remained in the boardroom, coolly discussing transition logistics with the board, her voice the calm epicenter of the storm he had created. Her victory was not in his humiliation, but in her own quiet, unassailable control. For their final meeting, Amelia chose the battlefield of their shared history, the sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park. When Julian arrived, he found it cold and sterile. The vibrant art they had collected was gone, replaced by pale squares on the walls. The custom furniture was shrouded in white dust sheets, giving the room the atmosphere of a mausoleum. It was a home no longer merely a high-value asset, awaiting liquidation. He was a trespasser in his own past. Amelia stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a silhouette against the glittering cityscape. She didn't turn when he entered. She let the silence stretch, forcing him to confront the emptiness he had wrought. Her hand rested protectively on her now prominent baby bump, a clear and present symbol of the future he had discarded. Finally, he broke. "What do you want, Amelia?" His voice was a rasp, stripped of its usual confidence. "You've taken my company. You've taken my reputation. You've won. What's the point of this final spectacle?" "This isn't a spectacle, Julian," she replied, her voice soft but echoing in the cavernous room. She turned to face him, her eyes clear and devoid of the hatred he expected. What he saw was far more devastating. It was pity. "This is an exit interview. I wanted to look you in the eye one last time, not as my husband or my enemy, but as the co-founder of a life we once planned to build." She gestured to the shrouded furniture. "I remember when we bought that sofa. You were so proud because it was the first thing we bought that wasn't from a second-hand store. You told me it was the beginning of our empire. An empire for us." She took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "You were the one who turned our life into a business, Julian. A series of assets and liabilities. So I learned to speak your language. I'm just here today to finalize the dissolution of our partnership." He flinched, the words striking him more painfully than any shout. "So what are the terms? What pound of flesh do you want now? I don't want your flesh. I want my freedom. And more importantly, I want my child's," she stated. "So here are the terms of your surrender. First, the divorce will be uncontested. You will not fight it. You will not delay it. You will sign whatever is put in front of you. The settlement will be generous, drawn from your personal assets, the accounts and properties that predate my involvement on the board. I am leaving you with more than enough to disappear and start again. I am not leaving you destitute. That was your plan for me, not mine for you. Second whore," she continued, her voice hardening, "you will sign away any and all legal claim and parental rights to this child. You will have no custody, no visitation, no contact, ever." A flicker of his old entitled self ignited. "You can't do that. He's my son. My blood." "Is he?" Amelia's voice was laced with ice. "You stood before God and 1,000 people and prepared to commit a felony, an act that would have legally declared this child illegitimate. You stood in that grand hall and called him a thing inside me. You don't get to claim him in the dark after you denied him in the light. This isn't a punishment, Julian. It's a protection. I am protecting my son or my daughter from a father who sees love as a liability and family as a merger opportunity. They deserve to be cherished, not leveraged. The child will bear the Thorn name because it is a legacy I have now cleaned and redeemed. They will inherit the better part of it. Finally," she said, walking over to a starkly modern coffee table the only piece not covered by a sheet. On it sat a single thick folder. "You will sign this. It's a mutual non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement, ironclad and perpetual. You will never speak of me or my child to anyone. Not to the press, not to your friends, not in a tell-all memoir 10 years from now. You will become a ghost, and in return I will afford you the same courtesy. The world will move on, and Julian Thorne will simply be a business footnote." He stared at the folder, a bitter, broken laugh escaping his lips. "And if I refuse? What if I decide to fight, drag this through the mud for years?" Amelia looked at him, not with anger, but with a weary finality. "I truly hoped you wouldn't ask that, but I planned for it. If you refuse, then tomorrow morning, as acting chairwoman of the board, I will authorize a full, deep-dive forensic audit of Thorne Industries, covering the entire period of your CEO tenure. We'll bring in the best investigative accountants in the country." She let the threat hang in the air. "I wonder what they'll find. Perhaps we could start with the undeclared corporate accounts in the Cayman Islands you used for the Rocher deal's preliminary gifts, or the millions in consulting fees paid to shell corporations that trace back to your mother. Or maybe just the simple common fraud of using corporate funds for the down payment on Isabella's ridiculous engagement ring. I was your partner for 7 years, Julian. I know where you cut the corners." She saw the blood drain from his face. She had him, completely. "You have 2 paths, and you will choose one now. You can sign this folder, take your millions, and vanish with some dignity intact. Or you can refuse, and I will dedicate a significant portion of the company's resources to ensuring your next board meetings are with the district attorney. Choose." Slowly, like a man moving underwater, he walked to the table. His hand trembled as he reached for the pen. He didn't read the documents. He knew it didn't matter. He signed page after page, his signature, once a bold assertion of power, now the hurried scrawl of a defeated man. He pushed the folder back towards her and turned to leave a stooped figure silhouetted against the door. He didn't look back. Amelia stood alone in the quiet, empty room for a long time, listening to the hum of the city. There was no triumphant surge, no thrill of victory. There was only a vast, quiet, and profound sense of peace. The war was over. The weight she had carried for so long had finally been lifted. She placed both hands on her belly, feeling the strong, steady kick of the new life within. This was her true north, the reason for the fight, the purpose for the victory. Her future was no longer an empire of glass and steel, but one of unconditional love and limitless possibility. She wasn't a scorned wife or a corporate raider. She was Amelia Thorne, a mother, and she was finally, irrevocably free. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a wedding crashed or a cheater exposed. It was a story about the immense power that lies dormant in those who are underestimated. Amelia Thorne walked into that hall as a victim and walked out as a victor, not because of revenge, but because she chose to fight for her truth with intelligent strategy and unwavering courage. She proved that the strongest foundations aren't built on money or fame, but on integrity and self-worth. She didn't just reclaim her life. She rebuilt an empire on her own terms for the future of the one person who mattered most, her child. What would you have done in her shoes? Let us know in the comments below. If you were captivated by Amelia's journey from heartbreak to power, please give this video a like, share it with someone who loves a story of ultimate justice, And be sure to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories of strength, drama, and empowerment. Click that notification bell so you never miss a single moment. Thank you for listening.